it comes back again to this communication word I keep using. And, I always say the root of all conflict is miscommunication. So, and usually the school is involved in social services, and it's not because you have harmed your child. That's a whole other issue.
Not please call social services if somebody is harming their child.
Yes. So it's not that a child has been harmed, but there's perceived harm, and no harm has taken place, and the school has called them. It's because of misunderstanding.
Of course, growing up, mom wasn't the name of one person. So yes, of course, I knew my biological mom. But there were so many other moms, and we used to name moms by location, so we had big mom, we had mom located in one place and the mom located in another place. And so this idea that motherhood, parenting was something that was shared. But one of the things that struck me then when I came to this culture, when I didn't understand it initially was, I was in church. So little kids were running around in church, and I kind of tried to, restrain, and it wasn't taken to kindly at all.
Really study the system, understand the system. I attended conferences where they were talking about education and the school system, so I could really understand it, because I didn't even know that there were what they call here sets, where you can be in lower set, you can be in higher set.
Hello, Diaspora and family. Welcome to another one of our episodes where we talk about all things parenting across cultures. You see, parenting, it's a journey. But when you have to do it in a whole new culture, that brings a different dimension. And here at Diaspora Mom, we say you don't have to do it alone. Today we have an episode where we're going to be talking to an exciting guest who brings lots of perspectives on this very question of parenting across cultures, both from lived experience, but also from a professional perspective. So without much ado, let me welcome our guest for today, Pastor Andrea Onduku. Welcome to Diaspora Mom.
I'm so happy to be with you here.
Thank you so very much. So, first things first, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself? Who is Pastor Andrea?
Where to start on that question? How far back are we going? I guess I could tell, since we're talking about that, exploring mom, and we're talking about parenting, I'll tell you a little bit about my family, how I grew up. I have came from a small nuclear family, actually. Mom, dad, 2 children. That was it. And not too much experience of extended family, all that. Yeah. So whilst I had somewhat of a relationship with my mom's dad, my granddad was the only living grandparent on her side, and then on my dad's side, funny enough, it was my grandma. So I had granddad and grandma, and not much experience beyond that. So it was a very nuclear kind of family, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad was very hardworking, had 2 jobs, and that was my experience growing up, close family, and so I kind of carried that forward into my family
life.
Yes.
Okay. And so for the sake of the audience, Pastor Andrea was born in
Northern Ireland.
In Northern Ireland. And we're recording in England today. Yeah. So we are across cultures. And so in terms of what you do, could you talk a little bit about that?
What I do, I always say I have many hats.
Yes.
First and foremost, I am a mom myself. As I mentioned, I kind of took that aspect of how I grew up. I wanted to be very, very present in my children's lives. I have 3 kids, and so very much a mom. But in addition to that, I'm a pastor's wife. And in addition to
that, a pastor in your own right.
Well, yes. And I trained as a counsellor. So I'm also a counsellor and a mentor to young people. And then I'm an editor as well. So many different things. What I focus on most, I would say, is parenting and counseling. I've been opportunity to be able to have an impact on many, young people's lives, especially, which has been wonderful.
And just to say, just because I know a little bit of Pastor Andrea, she does work with several families from different contexts, different backgrounds, different cultures. And because she doesn't want to say this herself, she actually trained first of all as a psychologist. So she actually has a degree in psychology and then trained as a counselor. So, and she has worked with young people for a very long time. So this is somebody who, like I said, from lived experience in terms of first of all, being a child herself and being parented, but also being a mom, but then working with several families in this space as well, across different cultures. Excellent. So, so just talking about that then, in terms of both your upbringing, your educational training, your professional training, your pastoral work, working with families as a counselor, what would you say perhaps are some of the key things that we need to take account of in this journey when we're parenting? That's a big question.
I was going to say that you people like asking very big questions. How do we unpack that? I mean, what are some of the key things? As somebody who, I'm also very passionate about communication. It's something that, of course, through, like you said, lived experience and also training, is central. I mean, I studied person-centered counseling.
Okay.
To be
Person-centered
person-centered counseling.
What's that?
And so it is about where you take account of the person and everything about that person. So you're not there trying to dictate as the expert about what this person thinks, feels, and should do. And so that is kind of how I do everything that I do. It's very much about making sure you listen. So as a parent, as a child or a parent, everything is about being able to listen and being able to understand whether what you've communicated is being understood by the other person. Because communicating could just be you talking and talking and talking, but you might not be being understood. And communication is about understanding. So it's something I really emphasize as a very important aspect is communication.
Communication.
Yeah.
And of course, as parents, sometimes that's the most challenging thing.
Yes.
Because you've got so many balls you have up in the air and you kind of want to move from one thing to the other.
Yes.
But taking that time to person-centered counseling. So taking that time to understand the person and communicate in a way that resonates with that person is really key, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, I've learned something today. Excellent. So, so coming back to the diaspora mom then and sort of parenting across cultures, what would you say about your culture that has informed, you kind of said you came from a nuclear family, very small nuclear family, and that kind of informs what you do now. But maybe if you just wanted to expand a little bit more on how your culture influences your parenting style and how perhaps you see that differently because of the multicultural environment in which you work. Does that
it makes sense. I mean, coming and growing up in Northern Ireland, it was a very traditional upbringing. It was a very religious upbringing. And, whether you intend to or not, you tend to carry your background forward with you. And so, what I try to do later as a parent is really sort of backtrack and say, am I doing this because it's what I saw growing up? Or am I doing this because it's what my children need? And so that is something that, what I brought forward, I think, is the amount of investment that my mom made in my life. My mom was very intentional in making sure that we understood we were important. We were special. Whether we received that or not is a whole other issue. But she was very invested. She taught us to read before we went to school. She was always checking up on how things going at school, making sure she was very heavily invested. And I think that is mostly what I carried forward, in that I wanted to give the utmost attention to parenting. I understood that it was not my children were not going to grow up just by themselves. They needed that investment. But on that, that's a very big responsibility. When you take it upon yourself that So what I think, moving on to the second part of your question, what have I picked up is more of that. It's okay for the community to help you with your parenting. Because growing up, all I saw was only my mom and dad parenting.
So parenting was very nuclear. It was very much you and the immediate family.
Very much. And and I say mom and dad, but more of mom. Because my dad was always out at work. He did, when he got home from work, he was very good at, doing bath time and getting us to bed, and, holidays he'd be with us. But I mean, a lot of the nitty gritty emotional side of things was mom. And that's a lot of responsibility for somebody to carry. Yeah. And so I've learned more that it's okay for you to be able to lean on others. So you have your faith community. There's the school community, there's teachers, there's all these people and all these resources, and even outside agencies as well. There's tutors, there's mentors, and I've seen that it's okay to have a wider circle of people having an impact, and helping you on that journey of parenting. I think that's what I've learned.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think one of the things we talk about is really this importance of having a village or having a community. And for somebody like me who comes from a very different cultural background, yes, where the community is, big. And of course, growing up, mom wasn't a name of one person. So yes, of course, I knew my biological mom. But there were so many other moms, and we used to name moms by location, so we had big mom, we had mom located in one place and the mom located in another place. And so this idea that motherhood, parenting was something that was shared. But one of the things that struck me then when I came to this culture, when I didn't understand it initially was, I was in church. So little kids were running around in church, and I kind of tried to, restrain. And it wasn't taken to kindly at all. And I think for me, it was the first time I realized, okay, there's something different here around the freedom I have, perhaps to intervene in a child's life when the parent hasn't given me consent. I don't know what your experience has been of that in your own environment.
I mean, I think you mentioned something about the parents' consent. I think what we'll find is that if we, it's not something that can be taken for granted in the culture here, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I think my upbringing, yes, it was very much that small nuclear family, but it's not the experience of everyone in Northern Ireland or even here in England. So I have, met several people who are of the same culture as me, but would have a much different experience. So sometimes we can generalize a little bit. So we might find that if we kind of seek that consent, it is granted. But it is very much seen as an overstep if consent is not granted. And so I remember, when I had my daughter, and she used to have this big, very wild hair, and someone would come to me and say, you don't know how to handle her hair, should I help you? And at the time I felt that was an overstep, because I took it as a criticism of I was doing something wrong. But later I got to understand that wasn't, and this is what I mean about communication. If we understand the starting point of each person. So if I had been able to understand that this person's starting point was not one of criticism, but one of genuinely wanting to help. And if the other person has understood that the way to enter the conversation with me wouldn't have been, you don't know how to do her hair. It might have been, I'm very much a layering person. So, compliment, criticize constructively, and then compliment again. That's the way to me. So if you get to know me and then you say, okay, I really love how, I really love this dress you've chosen for your daughter. She looks beautiful in it. You know what would look really nice? If you do this kind of hairstyle, you use a bit of wisdom with it, I would have received it better. So yeah, that's important.
Yeah. And again, that's really important, because again, that's why it's nice to have these conversations about, navigating different cultures, because in series 1 I talked about this a lot, about all of the culture shocks that I had, because this thing you're saying, for instance, about layering and complimenting, I'll be honest with you, it was not how I grew up.
Yeah.
So somebody comes straight and just tells you, what's that? And culturally, it wasn't seen as something that was wrong, or and I think also just because there was a lot of how shall I say, just by the very nature of communalism, that people can just step in and you kind of take that as the given. But of course, part of what we're learning in diaspora moments, we're not in that space. And so both in terms of how we interact with the village and the communities that we're building here, we kind of need to understand how do we navigate, how do we communicate across cultures so that we're not having misunderstandings, but also for our children, because our children live in this culture. They're not seeing the culture we come from and how that will be natural there. So if we're not finding ways in which we bridge that communication, how we communicate things, then of course they're going to be thinking, why is mom talking to me like that?
Yes.
Or so, yeah, I'm big on I'll be me. I've always been me. I don't think I've ever stopped being me. But I think the presence to understand that we all need to find ways of balancing when you're operating across cultures. No, that's great. So let's maybe move this forward a little bit then to some of the practicalities. So one of the things I found, again, very, very different coming to this culture was the educational system. So I'm from Nigeria. If your child goes to a school, there's a common curriculum. Every child in the class learns exactly the same thing. They'll bring the homework, and I expect lots of homework. And I'll support the child through that. At least that's how I grew up. It wasn't how I parented, because by the time I was parenting, I was in this culture. But kind of just navigating that, understanding that was a bit of a challenge, because there's sort of nuances, differences, that if you as a parent are not aware of, has implications for your children. So maybe if we just move on to that then, the educational system. If you want to talk about it a little bit from your perspective.
I mean, as we mentioned, I grew up in Northern Ireland to start with. So surprisingly, even though it's one United Kingdom, the way education was done, at least when I was younger, to the way that I met it in England was actually different in itself. So when I was growing up, I was actually able to be moved ahead because I think my reading age was, because I said my mom had taught me how to read before I even went to school. So I remember they when I was about 6, they took me to like a class of older children to, demonstrate how you could read properly, apparently. And so anyway, I was able to move ahead. But when I had my children here, I discovered that's not what happens here. You don't get moved into another age year unless it's bound by your biological age, not your ability. So you can now have a situation where you're in a classroom and you could be academically ahead of the other children in that classroom, but you're not moved ahead because of that. So that can, if you're not careful, can hold the child back. On the converse, you could be a child that is struggling with a particular thing, but you get moved ahead anyway. You go, whether you've passed
understood that context.
Exactly, you still move to the next academic year. And so it can be difficult either way. You can either be behind or ahead, but you're still moving. And so there are challenges with that. So these are things that I didn't automatically know when I had children, and I had to really study the system, understand the system. I attended conferences where they were talking about education and the school system, so I could really understand it, because I didn't even know that there were what they call here sets, where you can be in lower set, you can be in higher set. I didn't know any of this. So in terms of someone who's coming into the country for the first time, they may feel like everybody else knows what's happening and I don't know. Well, you might find that others don't know either.
And I think that's a really important point, to just know that even if you're from within,
absolutely,
this culture, that systems can differ. And I know that as well, because when I first came into this country, well, not when I first came, but when I started parenting, I was in Scotland, and the educational system in Scotland is different from England, which is where I think we moved to England when my son was 7 years old. And just in terms of even how many years they do in primary school, in Scotland they do 7 years, in England they do 6 years. And then the age for entering primary school, the cut-off, in England is the 31st of August. In Scotland is the 28th of February for you to start the next year. So lots of tiny differences that I wasn't aware of being in Scotland and then moving over to England to continue, or in fact Wales, to continue with education for my child. So just that thing that we all need to kind of understand different systems, different policies, and make sure that you know what's happening with your child.
Yes.
Yeah. So on that point then, I think one of the things that families talk to me about is, and again, I experienced this, and I know I'm just jumping today, but it's how do you have conversations with teachers, in a way that is productive. And that's because, first of all, and we will talk about this a little bit later, a lot of migrant families, one of the things that are attractive for them from migrating is their children's future, and the belief that they're in systems where the educational system is strong, and therefore children are going to have a good education. So that's kind of like a really important value for them. And oftentimes, when you then go and have conversations with teachers, because maybe you don't quite understand, or you feel that there's an issue with the child that you want to get a better understanding of. One of the things I was very surprised about was, now I'm understanding a little bit better, I'm not so sure that I'm 100%, but it was, we don't compare children to one another. And the question I had asked was, how is my child doing for his age, now that he started school, how is he doing, how does he compare to what he should be doing at this age? And the teacher's response was, no, we don't compare children. And I'm thinking, well, you put him in a child because he's that age. So, in a class, So you must expect certain things from the child in that class. And I think over time, I kind of learned how to navigate that space and have those conversations. So if you were going to advise our diaspora family, people who are also in that space, what would be some of the ways in which you think communication, again, we can have conversations that are effective and helpful for both the parent and the teacher, so that their children can, be the best that they can be, which is what every child wants, and every parent wants.
It is what I do advise a lot of families that I work with, is maintaining that, it's good to maintain that communication with the school. So even if you're getting pushback from the teachers in that sense, keep on having the conversations. They would, even if initially in the first meeting, they're not understanding where you're coming from and you're not understanding where they're coming from, the more regular you have these meetings, the more that they will get to understand your perspective. And you just keep on pushing through. And I think the perspective comes from that, I was talking earlier about person-centered. So the approach is very much that your child is doing the best that your child can do, and that's all that's important. Whereas, as you rightly said, many families are like, no, I came here to give them the best education, and so I want you to push them. But the schools will not, it's something you will notice, the schools will not push the children because they don't want to push a child to a point where the child feels anything negative, feels less than. They're very much about your child is fine. And so even myself, perhaps because of the influence of the community where I am, I also became a bit like, well, what can they do better? What can my child do better? And it's always been, there's nothing they can't, they're doing their best. Or, if you have a well-behaved child that is doing their best, the school is happy. The school doesn't want to push. So I find that what I advise is there's a lot of resources of how you can support your child. Get to know, what I often do, what I advise people to do is know what your child is studying in school, the curriculum, for example. And then get resources. There are fantastic resources that stretch them within, so like workbooks and things that you can do that would work alongside what they're doing in school, but stretch them a little bit further. and then just keep having those conversations, and it will gradually get easier and better.
So I think that's a really important point that we need to know in that parenting journey. Because again, to be very honest with you, it's something that I push against, because I kind of feel like I'm not an educator as well, although I educate all the children. And what I feel is that certainly when it came to my child, it wasn't even so much wanting the child to do what they can do, because I was always quite aware of where my child's strengths were and what they couldn't do. I think my challenges always were, so they predict them grades.
Yes.
So they'll predict and they'll say, oh, this child is predicted A, B, C, D, E, whatever. And the child, so you've predicted, so you're saying the child is capable of this. And then so you're going for those maybe parent visiting days, and you see, oh, they haven't quite achieved that grade. And so you're kind of saying, oh, they were predicted this, they haven't got that, what could they be doing differently? Oh, no, they've done well enough. And I think for me, that's where I struggle.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, you predicted, not me. So if you predicted, you're saying the child is capable of this. And just because the child has passed doesn't mean that the child is working at their optimum. So how can they work at their optimum? And I think what you were saying is, the schools may not necessarily do that for you, especially if you're in the government school area. So you as a parent, if that's what you want to do, you need to first of all understand what is the child doing at this age, and then maybe get resources to work alongside your child.
Yeah.
But of course, we want to be sure that the children have balance.
It's a holistic approach. That's the thing. So the school will also be very, very particular about taking a holistic approach with the child. So if they're not just about the grades. So if the child is like predicted an A and is currently on a B, and they sense that there's some other emotional issues going on or whatever, they will take that into account. Whereas, sometimes as parents, we're like, no, all that matters is that A. If you don't have that A, I don't want to hear from you. But that's why it's about, there's some things that we can learn. There's an approach that we can take. It's not the softy approach that we wouldn't like, but it's also not the very harsh one either, because, when we push a child too hard, they're funny children. The things that they will go into school and say, I was up till 9 o'clock last night doing homework. Oh, well, we didn't set much homework. What was going on? Oh, my mom said unless I finish this 50 questions before I'm not going to bed. And they will just go and repeat everything. So what we could be trying to do is the right thing and help the child, but it's misinterpreted. And that's something we have to realize when communicating, because I've worked with families where these things it's not, when we think about safeguarding issues or social services getting involved, we might think it's only about physical discipline and all those stereotypical views. But schools will be listening, they've been trained to listen for even emotional issues. The way we express when we are angry and so on, even by tone of voice, what were the words we use. My mom said that I couldn't do this homework, so I'm stupid. A lot of these things will get fed back to school, and then that's going to impact the relationship between the two. So I think it's important that we use all the resources there are, but then there's something to be learned on both sides. I can learn something from school's approach, and they can also learn something from me too.
And I think that's where the conversation comes in, the communication comes in. As I said, I'll put my hands up. It's taken me a while, and I'm still not completely there, because just to the point you made about, and I think it's about understanding different cultures, and when you're kind of the minority culture, there is already this understanding that in this culture, this is how things are done. So that is right. And I think one of the things that diasporan parents, people parenting across cultures need to understand. You may not like it, but you need to understand that there is a dominant culture, and then how do you navigate that culture in a way that makes your child whole? Because that's the key thing. Because ultimately, what we want is that our children are whole. So one of the things again that I struggled with was just this point you made about, my mom, because I did used to give my child homework, and we used to do reading together and all of that. And they'll pick up on that and say, oh, I remember one of his teachers, he was 4. Oh, Taylor said he's not reading another. Oh, yeah. They pick up on that. But my point was, why are you picking up on the reading when I'm doing reading with my child? But if my child was watching TV till 10, no teacher ever picks up and says, oh, your child is watching too much TV. Did you still see what I mean? So it's almost as if the positive things that you're doing to reinforce knowledge and all of that are the things they focus on. But if a child is all night playing games, that's never been something that anyone has raised with me. Maybe it's happening, I don't know. But that's never been something that anyone's raised with me to say, oh, the teachers were concerned because the child is watching too much TV or watching too much games. It's always when you're trying to do what you think is in the interest of the child. And that's where maybe we'll come back to this discussion. So maybe just on that point then, because this whole push and pull about what parents want to do, what their background, what the values from their background is, and what the new culture brings. Sometimes it brings tension that raises, problems that makes families come, as we were saying earlier, come into the, if you like, the purview of services. And I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, about what families need to be aware of, so that they do not come in, because nobody wants to be involved with social services or any of that, because and for a lot of families the frustration is, but I wasn't harming my child, I wasn't trying to hurt my child, I was trying to do good. So what are some of the things that families need to be aware of in that space, and how do they navigate it in such a way that they're bridging both cultures effectively?
So you've not
Please call social services if somebody's harming their child.
Yes. Yes, no communication. So when my child understands, for example, my child said to me that I know how much education is important in our household, and so we might not go on all of the holidays that other people go on, but if I need a laptop for studies, I need some books for studies, I know I will have them, and she tells that. But if she's going to someone and saying that, I'm miserable and I'm not, my parents don't care about me, they deprive me of everything, that's going to be flashing alarm bells. You see what I mean? So I think the first step is even helping our children to know why we are doing something.
Exactly.
So if you find yourself in such a position where it has ended up where social services has been called, lean on the community around you, ask around, what can I do, how do I get myself out of this? Don't argue, don't fight, just try to lean on others.